Oh, real quick, as a reminder, open up your JNUC app if you have questions. We'll get those answered later on.
Awesome. Well, hello everyone, and welcome to my session, Analyzing State-Sponsored Malware on macOS. I'm really excited to be here, JNUC 2023, and talk about advanced persistent threats, particularly North Korean state-sponsored malware. So we have a lot to cover, so I'll go ahead and get started. My name is Firdal Saljuki. I also go by Sal. I'm a senior threat researcher here at the Jamf Threat Labs team, where we focus on analyzing malware, building detections for our product, Jamf Protect. Also, sometimes we identify vulnerabilities on macOS, report them to Apple, and ensure customers are protected. You can also find me on Twitter or X as MalwareZoo, whatever the new name is. So a little overview about what we'll be covering today. We'll take a look in how to set up a malware analysis environment, just briefly, and we'll look into Operation Dream Job campaigns. This is a campaign attributed to the Lazarus group, so we'll briefly cover that. Then we'll jump into a little bit about Lazarus, BlueNoroff APT groups, and then we'll cover some threat hunting on macOS and how we discovered a malware earlier this year called RustBucket. This is actually attributed to the BlueNoroff APT group, and how we identified the first stage, which is Apple script applet, which we'll get into shortly. And then stage 2 as well, we'll look into that, a Swift PDF viewer, stage 3, the Rust backdoor, and then finally we'll take a look at some detections leveraging Apple's endpoint security API. And then if we have time, I want to look at JokerSpy malware as also a more recent malware attributed to the BlueNoroff group. So for malware analysis environment, there's a lot of different tools that you can leverage and use to help with your analysis. These are just some of the tools that I use to help me analyze the malware that we'll be covering today. On macOS, the binary format is Mach-O, and you typically need a Mach-O viewer. Mach-O View is a free app. Mach-O Explorer also available on GitHub for viewing the structure of a Mach-O binary. And with malware analysis, it really consists of static analysis and dynamic analysis. And we'll be using both of those in order to perform analysis. Apparency is another great tool. There's many tools to check code signing and determine if application's unsigned, ad hoc signed, and Apparency does a pretty good job. You need a hex editor, typically. In this case, we're working with PDFs and stuff like that, so it's quite helpful to determine specific offsets that you want to look at. And then for dynamic analysis, I use Hopper disassembler. You're free to use any disassembler that you choose to. So IDA is a great disassembler, Ghidra, LLDB, Apple's built-in debugger, you can also use that. And then script editor, terminal, I'll touch on script editor like for the first stage analysis and why it's a helpful tool. And then terminal, of course, you can use a number of static analysis commands built in, like strings and file. And then Objective-C tooling, Lulu for network monitor, BlockBlock for persistence, and a Wireshark capture. So I just wanted to touch on this. So we really have, at a high level, 2 options for virtualization or for setting up an environment for malware analysis. You have the option to virtualize your environment, and in this case, I'm using an open source tool called VirtualBuddy. Unfortunately, it doesn't support snapshots yet, but it does work pretty good. Apple limits it in their virtualization framework. It lets you only run 2 VMs at a time. That's by design. And this VirtualBuddy application requires macOS 12.3 or later, at least running on Apple Silicon, which is what I'm using. Alternatively, you can use a dedicated Mac Mini or any Apple device that you choose, and you can you have APFS snapshots to restore from a point in time. So just before you detonate your malware for dynamic analysis, you typically want to make a snapshot. Fortunately, the snapshots are only good for about 24 hours when your disk kind of like uses a lot of space, and then it kind of overwrites the snapshot. And you do need to boot into recovery mode to restore from a snapshot to get that same point in time. So let's talk about how we can acquire some samples. Typically for us as malware researchers, we often use tools like, or threat feeds like VirusTotal for acquiring samples. But unfortunately, those are paid in order to download the samples. But a nice alternative would be to go to the GitHub for Objective-C, and Patrick Wardle manages this and updates it with all of the latest Mac malware. So if you want to follow along in your own time, you can also download the RustBucket malware samples from this GitHub page. So let's talk a little bit about Lazarus. Lazarus is an advanced persistent threat group that's attributed to the North Korean as a state-sponsored group. And their operations typically in the past has focused primarily on Windows. And recently, like over the years, we've seen Lazarus really extend its efforts to macOS, and likely because of the adoption of the macOS devices in enterprise environments. And on macOS, like as with other platforms, Lazarus typically aims to steal sensitive information, whether that's financial data, corporate secrets, other valuable data, and they might also use compromised systems as a foothold to move laterally within a network or launch further attacks. And like other threat groups, they're known to leverage their spear phishing and target the individuals through social engineering, whether that's through emails and through contacting specific individuals through social media, and often using malware apps disguised as legitimate ones. Lazarus is actually pretty known for two of their major destructive campaigns, the Sony Pictures attack in 2014, and this led to a lot of leaked documents from Sony employees as well as senior executives. And then the WannaCry ransomware attack has also been attributed to Lazarus. Taking a quick look at some of the things that Lazarus is known to do, they detect sandboxes or virtualized environments. So that's another benefit when we talked about like running on metal or detonating your malware on metal. It's one less check that you have to worry about. They're known to exfiltrate sensitive data, perform recon on systems, establish persistence, and usually that's through the form of launch agents or daemons. And they're known to also distribute signed malware. And of course, Apple will revoke those signatures. And they've performed denial of service attacks against Sony, and they leverage social engineering techniques to really deceive users. So let's talk about Operation Dream Job. This is a campaign that was discovered in 2022 by ESET and Sentinel-1, and it lured victims into using decoy PDF documents for various jobs in crypto. And they would target specific individuals and offer them these jobs in various crypto-related positions. In this case, you have Coinbase, an engineering manager position for product security. Let's take a look at this campaign. So the malware first stage component is the Finder Fonts Updater app, which goes and actually creates a folder under the user's home library fonts directory. And it's important to note that this piece of malware in particular was actually signed at the time. Of course, Apple revoked the certificate. And within this library fonts folder, you'll see a PDF document. That was the document that we just saw. And it also goes and retrieves a second stage called Safari Fonts Agent. The first stage payload essentially opens this PDF document, displays it to the user, goes in and retrieves the second stage component, and then from the second stage component, the malware executes to go and retrieve a third stage component. Unfortunately, the third stage component was not available since the command and control server was offline. So it's pretty unknown as to what the objective was there. But it is something that we see Lazarus using these decoy PDF documents in previous campaigns. The next is the Operation Dream Job. This time we see Crypto.com lure. Again, similar concept. And this attack chain is likely targeting someone on LinkedIn through a spear phishing message. And the first stage, again, will write to the library preferences under the home directory. And in this case, it establishes persistence. And again, opens a PDF document, retrieves the second stage, and then the third stage, unfortunately, is not available because the command and control server was offline. Next, you probably already heard about this, the 3CX supply chain attack. This is a pretty sophisticated attack involving a lot of components and pieces. 3CX is a VoIP application and distributed by 3CX, and of course it's signed and notarized by Apple. Legitimate application used by millions of users around the world, actually. And in this case, unfortunately, some of their build servers were compromised, and that led to a distribution of various builds on macOS that were infected with malware. So how exactly did that happen? Well, there was the first stage component. It was a malicious dilib called libffmpeg.dilib that was the first stage component of the malware that was the initial infection vector. And a dilib is essentially a code that's dynamically loaded at runtime, so when you launch the application. In this case, this dilib would go and check to see if a sessions log file exists. If not, it would terminate itself. And then it creates and writes this main storage, this hidden main storage file under the home library application support 3CX desktop app folder. And it creates this distinct UUID, and by combining hostname, OS version, and various other system artifacts. And then it goes to retrieve the second stage, which in this case is called update agent. And the way it does this, it sends a post request to the command and control server with a very specially crafted and formatted cookie. It's important to note that in the first stage component, the dilib, if you actually XOR the entire dilib file with the hex key 7A, you can actually dump all of the command and control servers that the malware was communicating with, and you can just see a few of them that were listed here. The second stage malware, the update agent goes and opens a config file, presumably a legitimate file by 3CX called config.json to grab the URL and account name values. And then it decrypts this UUID from the file from the main storage file I wrote earlier using the same XOR key 7A. And then combines this, sends a post request again to the C2 and with a formatted cookie, and then the malware terminates. Well, that's not very exciting, which we would expect further activity, but you also have to consider that this is a supply chain attack. So it's likely many victims are going to be communicating with the command and control server and checking in, and so therefore, like, there's going to be a lot of activity. And in this case, the Lazarus group is probably not going to want to distribute their final payloads to everyone, and only of targets of interest. And well, you also have to think that every time this 3CX application is going to be launched, it's going to go through the same process and grab the second stage payload. And that second stage payload, the update agent could be swapped for a full-featured implant and, you know, full capability. So that is definitely a possibility here. And it's presumably this is at a very early stage detected, and, you know, if this went on for many months longer, it could have been a lot more serious. Next, we also have the Jump Cloud supply chain attack. And Jump Cloud is an identity provider. And in this case, a Jump Cloud employee was targeted in a spear phishing email, and their environment was compromised where malicious code was injected into their commands framework. And in at least one case, this was a lightweight Ruby script, which would go and execute via the Jump Cloud agent. And this would actually go and establish persistence and deploy various other backdoors onto the system. So we'll just touch on some of these backdoors. You have the full house stored is a backdoor written in C, C++, communicates using HTTP. And it's capable of executing shell commands and file transfer, file management, process injection, so on and so forth. And the next is Stratosphere. It's a modular backdoor. And of course, this retrieves modules from either disk or from the command and control server and executing other additional capabilities. And finally, we have tie-dye, which again collects system information, executes additional payloads, and shell commands. So now let's talk about BlueNoroff. BlueNoroff, also known as APT38, is considered to be a subgroup of Lazarus. You could consider them as a subgroup or a specialized unit within the broader Lazarus umbrella. And the primary focus of BlueNoroff is on financial gain. And they specialize in attacking financial institutions, including banks, with the aim of stealing money to fund the North Korean regime. And BlueNoroff really employs long-term operations to infiltrate their targets. They often spend months within a compromised network before executing their final payloads. And their operations include sophisticated attacks, and one of the popular ones is the Bangladesh cyber bank heist, which almost $1 billion USD was attempted to be stolen, and millions were stolen. So to summarize, while Lazarus is a broad umbrella term for North Korean cyber operations with varied objectives, BlueNoroff, or APT-38, is a specialized subgroup within Lazarus that primarily focuses on financial theft. Some of the attack campaigns on the Windows side are referred to as dangerous passwords, crypto mimic, snatch crypto. Kaspersky actually did a pretty in-depth write-up on the Windows side if you're interested in checking out their write-up. Some of the things on the Windows side, and we'll see how this relates to when we do the analysis on RustBucket. They leverage Windows shortcut files, LNK files, VBS, PowerShell, and weaponized Office macro documents that are infected. And also, pretty recently, this group also evaded Mark of the Web flag, which is kind of similar to Gatekeeper on macOS. And again, impersonating venture capital companies and banks is what you typically see here on the Windows campaigns. So how exactly did we discover this malware? So like every other malware that we find, or it gets published, or we grab samples, we immediately do analysis and reverse engineering, understand how the malware works, and build detections to detect this malware, and also try and build detections to detect future iterations of this malware. And XESet is a malware that leverages curl and a lot of AppleScript. It compiles, it calls curl and then pipes it to, say, compile the AppleScript and write it to disk and then execute it. So while looking for or hunting for variants of XSet, potentially new variants of XSet, we actually came across something interesting. So how exactly did we hunt for this? Well, AppleScript, compiled AppleScript contains a very specific header. So looking at VirusTotal, we searched for this specific header, the bytes identified here at offset 0. And then we are looking for the command curl in this compiled AppleScript form. So in this case, it's in UTF-16, so every character is encoded as at least 2 bytes. So that's essentially the bytes for curl. And what we found was, we found this AppleScript called main.scpt, and this was embedded within a application called internal PDF viewer. And the thing that was interesting was, like, of course, this was unsigned. The name of the application kind of stood out to us, and it was compiled likely with the script editor as an applet. And again, completely undetected on VirusTotal. So this seems kind of interesting. Let's take a look at this application structure a little bit more in detail. So applets are essentially a script that has been saved as an app. It behaves like other apps. You can double click it and launch it. And when an AppleScript is compiled in this manner, an executable called applet is placed in the newly created application bundle under contents macOS, and then you have the applet, which essentially calls and invokes the script under contents resources and scripts main.scpt here. So stage 1. This is, so we downloaded this application and went to that, where the location to where the script was, and simply double click on it, and it opens in script editor, built-in application on macOS. Strange, why does that open? It looks like unfortunately the malware, fortunately for us, the malware authors did not compile their AppleScript as run only, meaning that I can simply open it by double clicking on it and view the source code. Well, I have the source code available to us. Let's take a look into this a little bit further. So it calls a number of do shell script commands, which essentially are going to be commands that are going to reach out to bash and execute a number of things. So first we have execution of curl, which is what we were looking for in our compiled Apple script. And it's writing to the user's shared directory a file called 1.zip. Okay, and it's reaching out to a domain called clouddnx.capital. And then this unzips it, it unzips this zip file into the same directory. And an interesting thing that stood out to us is the user agent here is curl with a 1 at the end. This was something that BlueNoroff has used in previous campaigns on the Windows side. So that was sort of like a clear indication that this was likely APT malware. Also, the domain that it's reaching out to, clouddnx.capital. And then it just simply opens this application, okay? And this is the second stage component. This is also an internal PDF viewer application. Same icon, looks really similar, but this time ad hoc signed. Something that, let's take a look at this a little bit further. This time, we don't have an applet, but rather the contents macOS folder actually contains a macOS executable called internal PDF viewer, and no Apple script in the second stage. So you might be wondering at this point, okay, how exactly did they run an ad hoc signed or unsigned application? Well, it turns out there is actually a PDF document with very clear instructions on how to override Gatekeeper, but also lots of grammar mistakes inside the PDF. So simply right-clicking and opening the application, an unknowing user is going to simply override Gatekeeper. And to be fair, Gatekeeper does prompt the user with the pretty scary-looking prompt saying that you're overriding system controls. So, yep. So this is the second stage. It's simply an internal PDF viewer application, and it doesn't do anything else. It's just a application built on Swift UI that simply indicates that you need to open some PDF document to view its contents. Okay, at this point, it's not communicating with the C2. There's nothing really malicious happening. But I wasn't convinced that there was actually, this wasn't malware. But so we decided to look a little bit further, hunting on VirusTotal. And we found these PDF documents, actually several PDF documents. But you can also see that the version on this application matches the version on the PDF to the left. And it's kind of hard to see, but it says this Safeguard Viewer PDF is a one-page PDF that says, please use the dedicated app for internal employees to view this PDF. And similarly, you have the DOJ and PDF that says use a dedicated reader to read the contents of this. So pretty interesting. So let's take a look at the second stage in our MacOView application. In the constant section of the executable, we noticed a 100-byte XOR key. And we decided to take this, and this is part of the second stage. And in our Hopper disassembler, we can set a breakpoint on a encrypt data function, which actually just decrypts a PDF. And if we set a breakpoint there, we can actually get all the contents of another PDF document that was embedded in this original PDF. So this is what actually gets displayed to the user, thinking that they really needed this application to view this sensitive PDF document. And the contents of that PDF really vary, but in this case, it was just a venture capital firm, it seemed like they just cloned the website of a venture capital firm and placed it in a PDF document in order to view the sensitive contents. So, but something else that also happened here was that this second stage, once we loaded it with the PDF document, this acted like a key to the malware, and it actually went to go and download it sent a post request to the command and control server to presumably download a third stage payload. But unfortunately, this was the response that we got from the third stage payload. 404, and we've seen this in all the different campaigns we've talked about so far. Like these malware authors know that breaking up their malware into various stages and components makes it a lot more difficult to gather all the components and do analysis for security researchers. So we didn't give up here. We can take a look, and even though we can't get the third stage yet, we know it creates a temporary directory, receives a file, writes a file to that temporary directory, gives it execute permissions, and then the program arguments are set, and the file is executed. So that we determined that just based on analyzing the second stage. And then taking a little bit, looking into that a little bit further, we see that the malware actually sends a post request to the command and control server, which was the pop-up that we saw from Lulu earlier, and a specially crafted user agent. And also, it passes a HTTP post request data of PW. Okay, that seems kind of interesting. Presumably, it acts as a key in order to get the right, in order for it to determine that this is actually someone running the second stage, and we should give it the third stage component. So, although we weren't able to retrieve the third stage with that PDF, we went and hunted for VirusTotal and crafted our own curl request that's going to submit a post request to the command and control server with all of the things that we just kind of talked about. The user agent, it's going to send the data with PW, and we plugged in a bunch of different URLs, and presumably to try and grab the third stage. And indeed, we were able to successfully download this third stage component. So the third stage is the first few things to note here. This is the first macOS malware from the threat group BlueNoroff, and this is also the first Rust payload from BlueNoroff. And the use of the compiled Apple script indicates that the malware authors were specifically targeting macOS. So why Rust? There's a number of reasons why someone would want to develop something in Rust. There's memory safety, concurrency, there's a lot of performance benefits, and of course the most important thing is it's cross-platform. So you can compile malware for Linux, for Windows, for macOS. However, that also introduces a lot of complications with doing reversing for Rust binaries. There's mangled function names that make it really difficult to identify functions and read them. There's ways to actually get around that, but also the massive binaries. The Rust binary was almost 12 megabytes in size, containing like a crazy amount of strings. And this is because Rust statically, any libraries that you're going to be importing into your program are going to be statically linked, so that so they're within the binary itself. And then continuous strings, there's no null terminators at the end of strings, so if you're running a strings dump on the binary, you'll just see massive blobs of like strings, and a lot of it could just be libraries that are being used within the malware, but not necessarily the malware's functionality. And then indirect main function calls also add a layer of abstraction with how the main function is getting called. So taking a look in Hopper, we see a crate that is called WebT, and it does a number of things and gets various system artifacts. And taking a look into this a little bit further, we can see that it actually grabs computer name, current timestamp, installation timestamp, and system boot time, as well as it grabs all of the running processes on the system. And there's actually also a VM check. So again, that's something we talked about at the very beginning of the presentation, and that was, if you're running on Metal, it's one less check you have to worry about overriding. And then all of this gets sent to the command and control server in a post request. So all of this gets sent to the C2, and then the malware sleeps for 60 seconds, and then it goes through this whole cycle again, collecting all this information, sending it to the C2, so on and so forth. And some of the hidden functionality of this malware is it has the commands of, it's able to receive commands as well. So although it might look like this might be the final stage, in fact isn't, it does have the capability to download and execute additional payloads. So it looks for the hex 31. If it receives that from the C2, it will self-terminate itself. If it receives hex 30 or 0, it will actually download any binary or script file from the command and control server to perform further malicious activities on the system. So that's enough talking. Let's kind of take a look about how this all works from the user's perspective. So if you just open some of the PDFs, you'll see it like, there's just one page, and this is opening it in just the default PDF, the preview application. And again, this indicates that you'll need to open it with the dedicated PDF viewer that we have. And otherwise, it'll just display this one-page document. And then let's go and try and launch this internal PDF viewer. Again, we get prompted. We need to override Gatekeeper as per the instructions of the PDF document. Again, you go ahead, open it, and there's the PDF viewer application. At this point, nothing malicious is happening yet. Keep in mind, we have Lulu, the network monitor, running in the background, trying to see any traffic that's going to be sent to the command and control server. So if we open this, one of the documents, this DOJ document, you can see that it's actually a massive document, and that's because it de-XORed another PDF from within the original PDF. And there's quite a bit of things in this document, but we still don't see any C2 activity or any network requests to the command and control server. Presumably, that was for a different version of the application, potentially on the Windows side. However, in this case, if we open it with the version 3 of the PDF that we saw earlier, we saw a post request. Lulu alerted us of that. And at the time of analysis, the command and control server, of course, is going to be offline. So crafted my own command and control server just to be able to test this malware. And you saw that second prompt there. That was it's sending the Rust third stage backdoor. So at this point, the system is completely infected, and I can pop calculator, run additional binaries, scripts, so on and so forth. And it's also important to note, although I haven't really touched into this too much, the last 5 bytes of the PDF is how the malware determines where the offset of the C2 is, and then the length of the C2, and then offset where the PDF that's going to be displayed to the user is, as well as the length of the PDF. So Elastic Security Labs, after our initial findings, was able to discover a new variant of this RustBucket malware that actually persists on the system as well. And you can see how that plist looks like here. So let's just talk about some of the detections leveraging Apple's Endpoint Security API. So primarily, we're going to focus on exec events, when the malware executes. And the detections here is going to focus on the first stage, since we want to be able to identify it at a pretty early stage. If we are looking for exec events where the process is curl, and then the process arguments contain curl with the 1 or curl1-agent or curl1 agent. Those are some of the user agents that we've seen with this malware. So that's one way to go about detecting RustBucket using behavioral-based detections in your own environment. The next is looking for the execution of the open command. And if the process arguments contains the user shared, that's the path to where the malware would write to, and it is an application, then you can also, as an additional check, go and verify to see if that application is unsigned or ad hoc signed, and then you can trigger a detection accordingly. And the third method for behavioral-based detections, you can also monitor for any unsigned or ad hoc signed binaries. So this is going to be focusing on the third stage Rust backdoor. And the third stage Rust backdoor actually required an argument, which was passed from the second stage. And that was the argument of the command and control server in order for the malware to communicate. And if we look for, in that case, that was an unsigned binary. If we look for binaries that are executing that are unsigned or ad hoc signed and contain at least one argument, and the argument begins with HTTP:/ or HTTPS://, then you can also trigger a detection. And shout out to Elastic Security Labs for this detection logic, and they also have an in-depth write-up on their blog as well, so you can check that out. So some detections using network traffic. Again, you can look for post requests, HTTP post requests. If you're intercepting TLS traffic, monitoring that, you can look for the specific user agents that the malware is communicating with. And also, if you're doing packet interception, you can look for post data containing PW, PD, PC, or PS. Those were some of the ones that we saw for C2 traffic. The nice thing is Jamf Protect blocks against this malware and all the indicators mentioned in this presentation. And lastly, to conclude, I wanted to kind of cover a more recent piece of malware called JokerSpy. This is a spyware from BlueNoroff, the same threat group which we covered for the RustBucket analysis. And Elastic Security Labs as well as Bitdefender did a pretty in-depth write-up on this, and they identified a Japanese cryptocurrency exchange which was being targeted with spyware. And it deployed this XCC binary, which was a spyware stager. And a stager is essentially a small executable that is essentially an initial payload. And that initial payload is used to gather or to get more larger and more capable payloads from the command and control server. So in this case, it checks for full disk access, screen reporting permissions, and if you decide to run this from within your terminal, it actually prints that out into standard out, so you can see the permissions that the malware has in that environment. And Elastic Security Labs also observed XCC being executed by 3 different processes: the IntelliJ process, iTerm2, as well as Visual Studio. And they determined that it's likely a malicious or backdoor plugin or third-party dependency that was. That's how the initial access of this malware happened. So taking a look in, they also identified that it downloaded additional Python backdoors and also a macOS Swift belt enumeration tool. This is a open source tool developed by a red teamer. It's available on GitHub, and we see this all the time. Malware authors leverage open source tooling that's available on GitHub. And that's something that we closely monitor and block. And then the backdoor features, you can see some of that there: surveilling the host, executing commands, exfiltrating data, uploading additional files. So if you're interested in more into the analysis of RustBucket, how we went about finding exactly the various stages of this malware, also how we went about building a command and control server to detonate the malware and have it execute additional payloads, check out our Objective by the Sea talk in the realm of Rust, a journey into RustBucket, a journey into reversing RustBucket on macOS. We also cover some of the challenges with reversing Rust and how to overcome them for malware analysis. And that is all. Thank you very much.
Sal, thanks again. I don't have any questions yet. You've got the app. Anybody have any questions they want to submit? Can we go through the app so everyone, or the folks that aren't here? They don't have any? Can you put it in the app? That way the people that aren't here will be able to.
No, but I can ask right now. Time, effort, and money. I'm just curious, with all these hacker incursions, what's your personal experience been relative to how much time, effort, money has been lost relative to these attacks?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it really depends, like in terms of the analysis that you're talking about, or in terms of the organizations that are being targeted. Okay. Yeah. So from our perspective, we see that, there's a lot of times like these malware authors. Like they would target cryptocurrency companies, and their goal, the BlueNoroff goal, their goal is to exfiltrate data or financial data, and really targeting cryptocurrency companies and financial assets. In the case of the Bangladesh bank heist, that was a major attack by BlueNoroff. They were able to successfully exfiltrate, I think $81 million from the bank, and I think $1 billion was almost attempted to be stolen, but fortunately they weren't successful in doing so. So this group kind of really operates as a subgroup within Lazarus, and their mission is really to just gather money for the North Korean regime, and they kind of operate as a subgroup within the Lazarus umbrella. So I hope that answers your question. Awesome.
Other questions? All right, well, thanks a lot, and have a good day 3 tomorrow.